So nice to be here. KellyAnne and I have been having this conversation now since early in the transition, starting in a conversation about the media, which appropriately started at Michael's restaurant in New York. So a report card. The media. Let's make the F grade the media as Steve Bannon's opposition party, and an A grade as the Obama honeymoon. Where are we now?
Well, as a mother of 4 who come home with report cards routinely, I'll just give an I incomplete, meaning I think it's way too early to render a specific judgment, let alone a grade, on the relationship between this president, this administration, and the press. And I do want to say that some of the words being used to describe that you're repeating, I do not use and have not used. I think it's very important in a healthy democracy to have a free and fair press. And part of that democracy, too, though, is to have a presidency, no matter who the occupant, that is shown respect and is shown an openness to really cover all of the items that he has put forth and his considerable accomplishments in the first 80-some days that really have gone uncovered. I think, don't want to grade, but I would say if you ask me one thing that I would change or one grievance I may have, it's not biased coverage, because if there is biased coverage, I have faith in the American people that they'll see that and they'll say, that's really unfair, or that's really over the top, or you keep saying the same thing over and over again and I'm still not convinced it's news to me. I think it's noise. So that's over here. I have faith in the wisdom of people. Biased coverage aside, my grievance would be what I would call incomplete coverage. It's the many things that we hear from Americans that are meaningful to them and consequential to them in these first 100 days that don't get the same amount of coverage as, say, this executive order or that attenuated, unproven relationship from the campaign with a certain country. And that's really a thing, because if you are an American and you're a coal miner who came to the White House, or you are someone who lives in the Northwest and you know what the waters of the United States is, if you are somebody who will benefit directly from the president having opened up the Keystone and Dakota access pipelines, this all matters to you in a very different way than you're hearing. What about the tonal issues? How do you feel waking up every morning and you see democracy dies in darkness? Does that rankle? Does that send a message? Is there a message beyond the leads in each story that's being sent here? A few things, and I think they are different, just given that this is 2017. There's this quest to make interviews go viral now, where one has to wonder, is the interview being conducted to inform the viewers or the larger population or electorate more broadly, or is the interview being done in a way that's meant to entertain other journalists or impress advertisers or executives? So that's one thing. The other thing is, you can turn on the TV more than you can read in the paper, because I assume editors are still doing their jobs in most places. And people literally say things that just aren't true. They're not even disguised as opinion. Yeah. They're not even disguised as opinion. People presume they know what's going on in the White House, how the president is thinking, what motivates him, what his decision process is. And they state it like it's a fact, and it's not often. And that's all right. But look, at the same time, I listened to your other panel, and there's a great discussion about Twitter and the president's use of Twitter. And it is true that the president regards his social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of it combined. He has millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of followers. He looks at that as a way to cut out the middleman, to directly connect and communicate with people. And it's what I call the democratization of information, meaning you don't have to wait for the evening news to tell you what happened that day. Everybody can access it at the same time. It could be the guy working on the job who's looking at his screen. It could be the stay-at-home mom who's busy with her children who's got the tweet deck up. It could be the cosseted billionaire CEO who has 20 people outside his office checking social media, but everybody sees it at the same time. It's a democratization of information. But I think we have to have a conversation about the use of Twitter among the media, too. Because there are things said about this president on Twitter that would never pass an editor's desk. Something I talked about in the campaign, and it's just true, and it continues on. It continues on. I see people live tweeting at Sean Spicer while he's in his press conference.
Well, we'll go to that. I mean, obviously there have been other Republican, conservative, and right-wing administrations which the media has accepted in a business-like way. What's the difference here? Why is there a obviously continuing resistance and underlying message that has I would certainly argue not been there before?
Well, some of it is who this president is and the unexpected result that he is the president. I think people simply were not prepared for the result and did not prepare their viewers and their readers for the result. And I'm astonished that in a nation that many people in the media were constantly saying is divided, we're in a divided country, that so many people never even entertain the possibility that in the self-described divided country that the other one of the two candidates may actually win. And so I think it was being caught unaware and really leaning so far to the other side that the race is over, the path is gone, the Republican Party will be destroyed, you'll take down every House and Senate and governor candidate with you, this is going to affect generations. I mean, if you go back and look at those headlines and you go back and see a lot of what was said on TV, it's unequivocally wrong and somewhat embarrassing. But we don't talk about it. So in some ways it was just we didn't see this coming, so it must not be real. Let's try to not make it real. Let's try to make it unreal. The other thing is there's just so much media now, and there's just this constant opportunity to engage in the conversation. That is different. That's just a sign of the times. Like I said earlier, it's 2017. So you have all these social media platforms. You have the media using them constantly, not waiting to file the story for the next day or the evening news. You just have an ongoing opportunity to communicate.
And what do you think, do you find yourself ever thinking and trying to really get to the nut of what the media thinks about this president and about you and other members of this administration? How personal do you take this?
How personally do I take what?
What this coverage of you, democracy dies in darkness, because I'm going to tell you, when they say democracy dies in darkness, you're the darkness.
I'm not the darkness.
You're no, and I don't.
Didn't you see the
I don't
skit,
mean
Walking
that.
on Sunshine?
That's not a.
You're saying that that's what it's meant to be, but
yeah, that's
again,
not certainly
it's what I tell
here.
small children. Just because somebody says something doesn't make it true, and it's a great lesson for everyone. And just because they say the darkness or democracy, it doesn't make it true. And you see, if you start with that, I'm here. But look, I'm not elected to anything. I'm there. If you're talking about the way the president is covered, I think there is something that I call presumptive negativity. And you can look at something and see it as a positive or as a negative. And for this president, it's often seen through the negative lens, which is not just unfair, it's actually inaccurate, and it denies, it really robs the larger viewership or readership or the American people of the opportunity to hear what's really happening.
Have you seen improvements over the last, what are we at, 80 days?
So I think there are some print journalists particularly who have taken the time to really try to get to know this president and how he operates and who he is, and maybe some of the senior administration officials. And they're doing much better, in my view, of covering the White House, of just doing their jobs, covering the White House. I don't know that folks have really taken a step back and said, okay, I missed a lot in the election, obviously. They said, I really got it wrong, which means I also didn't really understand what was happening in the country. And I heard Jim Acosta earlier saying if he could go back, he would take his anchors or his executives on the road with him during the campaign. Well, why not do that now for everyone? You know, why not go back and go and meet the people who feel like they're the forgotten men or forgotten women, who are rooting for this president and this country in a way that they want him to make good on these promises. They are part of the confidence numbers. The National Association of Manufacturing confidence numbers at 93%, up from 56.6%. That's not a rounding error from just a year ago. The home builders' confidence at a 12-year high. The consumer confidence, people want to spend their money, the job creation. There are people out there who are looking for positive signs and optimistic signs of progress, of growth, of prosperity, of security and safety. And they're going to look for that and find it or not find it, regardless of what's being fed to them. So one thing I would say, Michael, is if you were part of the very large group of people who are charged with covering the campaign, who got it wrong, at least don't keep getting it wrong by covering the president the way you covered him as a candidate and presuming. I think this presumptive negativity is very unfortunate. The other thing is, I saw all during the campaign what I see now, which is there's a comfort in sameness. I think sometimes for the media, and I don't see them as a conglomerate or stereotype them or just see them all as one big group. That would be wrong, and I don't. But there's a comfort in sameness. There's, you know, familiarity breeds contempt is the old saying. I think when it comes to some of the coverage, familiarity breeds contempt. And I will receive the same questions, as will my colleagues in the White House, from 30 different people in a row. And I'm not even the press and comm shop on purpose. I made that very clear when I came to the White House. That is not what I wanted my primary roles to be. But yet we'll still receive and they're all the same question. And I'll give you a great example. On Friday, everybody wanted to cover palace intrigue and who's up and who's down. And you know what happened on Friday? What the country saw happen on Friday. For the first time in 11 years, a Republican nominee to the United States Supreme Court was confirmed and has since been sworn in. And 40 years from now, no one's going to remember the staffers' names, but they will remember Neil M. Gorsuch, because by then he will have sat on the Supreme Court for 40 years and made his mark on American jurisprudence. So if you look at things that way, if you play long ball and you look at what's really the noise versus what's the news, what's going to impact real people over time, it helps you to, I think it helps you to divide and conquer a little bit better.
Why is the internal White House story such a big story during this administration, bigger than, and I'm not sure that these names will be forgotten. I mean, these names are being enshrined in popular culture as we speak in a way that other names in other administrations were not. Why is this such a big story?
Ask the people who are covering it, to the exclusion of covering what happened the day before, which were the tradios. You might say, oh, the tradios. Well, this is a president who took the issue of trade and illegal immigration as a candidate and catapulted them from single digits. Trade wasn't even asked in many polls as what's the most important issue. It wasn't even given, it wasn't even offered as an option. And took those issues and made them about fairness to the American worker, fairness to the American economy, you know, fairness to those who had suffered the 60 to 70,000 factories that have closed, a number that the president cites often. And he took these issues, and now as president, he and his Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, are taking a strong lead against the cheaters and abusers on trade. And if you read the tradios, and I suspect many people have not, I mean, remember, he's taken dozens and dozens of executive actions, and there's one that gets all the coverage. So you have to think about that, too. That's what I mean about incomplete coverage. But people are paying attention. They will go and they will see what's been done on jobs, what's been done on the regulatory framework, what's been done on can health care pass, will tax reform pass. And he will be judged by his accomplishments. He will be judged on when health care reform passes and what is put in its place. He will be judged by the Supreme Court nominee that just
on what basis do you think, and you're saying he will be judged by the voters, on what basis do you think the media judges him?
On what basis do I think they judge him? They judge him according to their predisposed beliefs about what motivates him, what his personality is, how he makes decisions, what's important to him thematically and issues-wise. And I just think a lot of the right questions are not being asked. And there is this comfort and sameness has this effect where people are afraid to go first. I really do believe that. And that's what I mean. There are a couple print reporters I can think of that I won't name that are doing a really good job about covering things just a slightly different. I mean, look, if you're all looking out of this pane of glass, you only have to tilt your head that much, 20, 30 degrees that way, and you can still see what everybody else is seeing, but you end up seeing something through an entirely different light, literally.
What do you think the media wants?
What do you mean?
Well, they want something. They're in business like everybody else. They either want, I mean, maybe they want Donald Trump to be less right wing, or maybe they want him to be a Democrat, or maybe they want him to. Often the media wants more access. I mean, clearly there's a deep discontent on the media side, and so I'm just trying to ask from your point of view, what is it that you think they want? What can you give them? What can't you give them? I'm trying to do a little family therapy here.
In my view, Michael, most members of the media want to get the story, want to get it right, want to have access, want to have sources, want to certainly have access to the president, the vice president, cabinet members, maybe the senior officials. Some in the media want to prove that they've been right about him all along. And you have a couple of people in the media openly questioning whether they should refer to him as President Trump. When have you ever seen that before? And I mean, I just wasn't raised that way. That you respect the office of the presidency and its current occupant. And yes, some of you out there are saying, well, this one and that one. But you're pointing to individual people. You're not pointing to an institution that is grappling with this big question. Some people are openly, the words that are used to describe him are, I can tell you that he is somebody who I believe has made tremendous sacrifices to become president of the United States and did it for the right reasons and had a way of connecting and communicating with people that is very organic. I mean, the idea that we were outspent by so much and understaffed by so much, and he and Governor Pence were just so effective. They were our two greatest assets in winning the race, and so effective in going out and naturally communicating and connecting with people. But I think that the media hasn't gone back, by and large, and talked to those people. Some have. But again, if we're just talking to each other, if the coverage of candidate Trump and nominee Trump and President-elect Trump and President Trump feel and look relatively the same, then I'd say we haven't really progressed into how to cover him as a president or an administration. It feels the same many days.
So there are these issues which have been articulated in many times from the president down, issues with the media, a real sense of acrimony towards the media. I think this administration has characterized the media in more negatively than any I can remember, and yet I kind of think this administration talks to the media more than any other administration. So how do you balance this negative view of the administration of the media, and yet this eagerness to talk to it by everybody? Everybody talks, whether you call it leaking or just talking. I mean, they talk. It is very accessible.
One thing I have noticed that if you're somebody who says I never talk to the media, you're really free to talk to the media as much as you want, because nobody would suspect you're talking to the media, which is fascinating. But on this issue, I would just say this. Do you actually think he's covered fairly and objectively?
Do I think? I think not at all. I think democracy dies in darkness. Every time I look at this, I think, oh my God. No, from my point of view, as someone who literally writes about this, I think that we're in totally uncharted territory. But having said that, this administration is more media crazy than any I've ever watched. I mean, you talk to the media all the time. You want coverage all of the time. You hurt when the coverage is bad. So you know, there's this interesting kind of thing. You know, and it goes the other way too. Obviously, the media hates you but can't get enough of you. You hate the media but can't get enough of the media.
Is you the administration you're talking about? Because
Yes.
you're looking at me.
Yes.
Yeah,
No, I
that.
just think of you as.
I don't really hate anyone.
Yes.
I have 4 kids. You can't scare me.
I have 4 kids.
There you go.
So.
We're scared together. So again, I think these are overgeneralizations, and I don't want to overgeneralize the relationship with the media or the media writ large. I see the White House press corps. A lot of folks work really hard and are there pre-dawn, there post-dusk. They try to get the story, et cetera. But I guess I am surprised at, and I know there's clickbait and viral interviews and all that, but I am surprised when we constantly see the same words used to describe the administration or the president, or you'll have the cabinet secretaries on the Sunday shows, something I've been advocating for months, and I'm very happy to see them out there. And then they'll give these great interviews, and the headlines will immediately be struggled to explain or contradicted, or those are already written. And again, what people really want to know out there is, what did they say, and what does it mean, and why should I care? And people will go find the news if they can't find it in the news. They just will. That's an advantage people have now. But when you say, when you talk about the hostile relationship, I mean, the free and fair press, that comes with responsibility, though, to be fair as well as just free. I mean, it comes with a certain responsibility. And if you read people's Twitter feeds, I'm telling you this is very important. I talked about it first in during the campaign on a morning show. And I know Jim Vandehei talked about it after that on a morning show. But it's a very important point, because it would never pass editorial muster. It just wouldn't. And if it says tweets are my own and it's 10:15 a.m. and you're in the building where you work, tweets are not your own. People see you as the person who then goes on TV later and is covering this presidency objectively, where you've spent an hour of your day responding to people on Twitter or tweeting nasty things that, just to other journalists see them. And I think that is not covered at all when one talks about the president tweeting. It's like those who are covering him and are tweeting, some of those Twitter feeds are a hot mess. Look, we want the relationship to be better. I'm a very pro-press person just because I love democracy and the First Amendment. But there's a reason that the president decided not to attend this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the rest of us will stand in solidarity with him. I respect that decision, because there's a two-way responsibility here. And the other thing I would just say about all this is there's also a selectivity to reporting. So today, the Politico Morning Consult poll shows that the president's approval ratings are higher than his disapproval ratings. You're not going to hear that. I don't know if we heard it this morning. I didn't listen to every word said. But you're not going to hear that. If it were the other way, and when it is the other way, it's every screaming headline, it's every chyron, it's every lower third on every cable station. And so there's a selectivity there also of what do we choose to highlight as a press versus what do we choose to allow to recede into the background?
So the New York Times, it seems to me, has a virtual beat, and in that beat, which often merits a front page story, the beat is the President Trump is an aberrant president, and this beat I would argue is sort of largely owned by Maggie Haberman, and I know the president's views of Maggie Haberman. And yet why does he speak to her?
What do you mean, his views of her?
Well, I know. I mean, his views of her is he doesn't like her. I mean, I've heard this.
Why would you say that?
Well, because he's told me.
Michael, I just have to push back. That's just not true. I think it's inappropriate to say who the president does not like. respectfully. And you just made my entire point about how he's covered like he's, you know, a guy sitting next to you on the bus. He's the president of the United States, and he obviously respects her because he gave her an interview last week.
No, well, that's what I'm asking. That would
She's one of two journalists he called right after the health care bill was killed.
Totally, and I'm wondering why she literally writes. You know, you can't not follow what she says and not conclude that this is her. Literally, it's a beat. The aberrant presidency of Donald Trump, New York Times beat. She's the writer on that beat. I know what the president thinks. I mean, I know what he has said about her, and yet he reaches out to her. So I'm just wondering what. I mean, maybe that's a good thing. You can say, you know, you reach out to people.
Well, it
who
certainly
don't like
undercuts the ongoing premise that, you know, he's not giving access to the press, or he's not fair to the press. He does. He gives interviews. But I just have to back up because you've mentioned somebody by name who I regard as a very hardworking, honest journalist who...
Yeah, no, it's on me. You didn't mention
No, she's a very hardworking, honest journalist who happens to be a very good person, a good person, a mom of 3 who works hard, who seems ubiquitous in print and on TV. And I think just had a really nice profile written about her. But since you mentioned somebody by name, it just felt a little uncomfortable. But he is somebody, Donald Trump is somebody who, as a businessman, as a successful businessman, as a very well-known New Yorker, who bet on New York and had vision when no one else would, who's a master brander, who is successful on television. He is somebody who has always dealt with the press. This is not unusual, unfamiliar, uncomfortable for him at all. He's a natural with the press. What's different is him being in politics. That's what's different. And what's different for the press is, in my view, is covering somebody in politics, now in the presidency, who is not a typical politician, who you weren't used to covering when they were a governor or a senator, where you had that relationship with them and their staff that was political/government in nature. It was Washington in nature, or was state government in nature. So it is look, everybody's still trying to find their way in that regard. But President Trump is somebody who has had a relationship with the media and frankly has had a lot of positive press over the years when he has been interviewed about his businesses or interviewed about his real estate projects or his other products that he's put out there, as golf courses, you know, which people love around the world. So this is not new to he and his family. What's new is that he's the president, and it's a whole different type of coverage. But I would implore everybody, really, if you look at, and when you think about how the first 100 days will be covered, I can close my eyes and tell you exactly how they're going to be covered. And then I can tell you exactly how America is going to want to see them. And we're going to speak directly to America, because if you look at the long list of things that the president has done that matter to people, that have real people impact, it's impressive. And when people feel like jobs were created or employers decided to attract and retain a workforce here rather than bringing those jobs abroad, when you think about the investments that were just sitting on the shelf in the billions of dollars with some of these companies, some of these employers, this is a president that's done things for the job creators, the job seekers, and the job holders. And we intend to convey that message whether or not it ends up being covered. And let me just say something. There's a story that's been talked about infinitely on TV that is almost gone this week because other things filled in. But I would argue there were always other things that would have filled the vacuum. Just nobody wanted to cover them. It's not exciting to cover energy independence and common sense environmental regulations. It's not exciting to cover tax reform. It's not exciting to cover how to get back on track with healthcare reform. But that is that's how he'll be judged. The forgotten man or forgotten woman didn't just come out of nowhere. They still feel like they're forgotten in terms of how this administration and this president is being presented to them.
Let me ask just a process question. So you have a quantitative increase in news outlets, and you have a quantitative increase in the news that you're producing. I mean, I think it's safe to say more news comes out of this White House. than any, certainly in my recollection.
Well, he's doing more.
Well, he's making news, certainly. What does, in that situation, don't you get to a point where actually you can never keep up so many news outlets, so much more news?
No, it's something I intimated earlier. There's just, you're asking me why this coverage. Some of it's a sign of the times. There's so many outlets and there are so many ways to be the media all the time on social media platforms, doing live outtakes on a TV show. This is very different from decades ago where, and it's even different from, I would say, the last Republican presidency with President George W. Bush, where there's just more and more disparate media. And there are additional opportunities to just always be on and always be covering. And so
how does that change the nature of coverage and the nature of this White House relationship with the press?
Well, I think people have a responsibility to try to look at everything that's being done and attempted over time and curate it in a way that is responsible and honest and gives people full information. Again, I saw during the campaign and I see it again now, a huge difference, indeed a disconnect between what people are being told is important to them and what people actually think is important to them. That is something that really has not changed in covering President Trump, from candidate Trump to President-elect Trump, which is people are being told, this is what's important to you, so I'm going to have headlines about it. We're going to talk about it all night long on cable TV. This is what's important to you. And the reason I know it's important to you is because I keep saying it's important to you. And so do the 10 people on the panel. And yet, there's not a lot of evidence. If you look at those TV networks and those print outlets' own polling, look at their own polling, what's actually important to people is not being covered. Jobs, economic growth, healthcare reform. And when I say covered, I don't mean check the box and cover the Tuesday group versus the House Freedom Caucus and what was said and what was done. I mean the issues at hand. There are people who say immigration is important to them. There are people who say the border is important to them. One outlet covered Attorney General Sessions at the border yesterday. That was news. And I understand why the media don't want to cover an Attorney General on a tarmac for nearly an hour, but why aren't they covering this Attorney General when he's at the border, following through on a major policy? Because it's not as exciting as palace intrigue. I mean, it's important to cover it. That's news.
If we had more time, I would go on to talk about the nature of message and who's responsible for that, and how you clarify your message and how you get the media to hear your message. But we have no more time.
I'll just make one quick comment on that. I still think our best messenger is President Trump, and I favor him doing press conferences. I favor him giving interviews. Just so we're clear, I mean, none of us can be a substitute for that, not on the campaign, certainly not in his administration. He is the best messenger, and as is the Vice President, Mike Pence. They're the best messengers, and they're the best spokesmen for what is happening in this administration. But messenger and delivery, I think delivery now, what is different is delivery is not just a style. You know, is it pipe and drape? Is what color tie are they wearing? Are they at the podium? Who's behind them in the shot? You know, these questions that politicians have been asking forever. Delivery now is a system. And we are delivering the message, we as an administration are delivering the message through many different outlets. So that's the whole point. Social media platforms, traditional networks, cable networks, newspapers, I suppose other online presence that people have. People are getting their information through so many different systems. That delivery is now a system. They're getting their information through so many different sources that it's a system. And that I think is very unique to these times. And I believe that President Trump is a very unique, well-positioned messenger to meet that new call of these different systems, these different opportunities to message directly with people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You and I will be continuing this.
Thank you.